All right, good afternoon, good evening, and for some of you, good morning. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome our viewers from across the globe to MotusAcademy's inaugural webinar event. My name is Taya Hamilton, and with me here I have Sarah Lim. We will be your hosts for today's session, diving into the future of rehabilitation, coffee with the leaders.
Thank you, Taya. I'm so excited to be hosting and chatting to our guests today. In combination, they have more than 50 years of experience within the rehab tech industry. As this session is also an official launch of the MotusAcademy platform, I would love to use this opportunity to invite the president of MotusAcademy to share his vision of the platform. So I'm inviting Professor Robert Wiener from ETH Zurich.
Thank you for inviting me, and also thank you for giving me a short time to speak to all of you as the president of MotusAcademy. I'm also welcoming you to this in our first webinar and first event. What is MotusAcademy? So MotusAcademy is a new platform for sharing all our knowledge in the field of rehabilitation technology, robotics applied to rehabilitation. In this way, it should connect all of us, stakeholders working from industry, people in research, clinicians, any kind of therapists and clinical people, students in our field. We are organizing webinars and many other kinds of different formats to improve the education, continuing education of all of you, to finally improve the clinical services and technologies we want to apply, to improve also the transfer of technologies to industry, and finally to the benefit to all the people of our society, to patients, to people with disabilities, and so on. We will also connect you within this platform to important societies like the ICRT, the ISART, the ICOR. With these connections, you will also get connected to conferences which are very important outfield, like the Rehab Week, which will take place in Rotterdam this year, like the ICOR, which is part of Rehab Week, and so on. So I think it's worth to join this great event with great speakers, which we have today. I look forward to this session and to many more sessions and meetings and events within this platform.
Thank you, Robert. Now, without further delay, I think we should invite our speakers. So joining us on our panel today, we have Mr. Zen Ko. Zen is the co-founder and deputy group leader, CEO for Intelligence Group. He has been in the field of medical devices now for over 20 years, starting companies and also influencing the field. He was nominated by the MDDI amongst 40 under 40's future most influential industry leaders in the medtech field. He is also incoming president of the International Industry Society in Advanced Rehabilitation Technology, or ISART, just as Robert mentioned earlier.
And next, we also have Gary. So Gary was the founder and former CEO of Hokuma, a global market leader in robotics and sensor-based devices for functional movement therapy. I'm hoping a lot of you would have heard of the Locomat. So that was Hokuma. So he is also the founder of iSearch and currently the ambassador for iSearch.
And last but definitely not least, we have Alex Colrider, who's the CTO at Tyromotion. He was also the founder of Tyromotion. He developed the first robot prototype in a clinic back in Austria in 2006, and Tyromotion was founded 1 year later. So he graduated from the Technical University of Graz, and he has led his team and expanded the portfolio of Tyromotion over the last 15 years. So lots of achievements there. Now we have a bit of, sorry, go ahead. We have a good idea of who we're speaking with. I think it's time we kind of get started. We've got lots of interested audience members. So we'll welcome questions from the audience. Please, if you could just type them into the Q&A box below, we'll try our best to keep an eye on that, and we'll answer them live as well. So first up, Alex, you're first up. I'd love to know, how did you get into the industry?
Thanks for asking the question. It was actually somehow good luck. I met a colleague who was, or still is, a doctor of a neuro rehab center in my neighborhood. And at that time, I worked at the university, Technical University in Graz. And he saw the need of developing a hand robot And at the beginning, it was a kind of technical challenge. Of course, a lot of degrees of freedom in the hand and finger joints. And we did this as a student project, so together with my student. And after 2 years research and development, we came out with the first prototype of Amadeo. We had the chance to test this device in Dr. Grieshofer's clinic with a lot of success. And then obviously it was a kind of logic to continue in this work. I personally dived also deeper into this business as my dad suffered a stroke at that time. So I saw also the personal need for this work. And so we tried a lot of other things. So we tried to license the technology to medtech companies, but more than 15 years back, the whole industry was not developed that much. So it was not that easy to find partners. And so finally, we founded our own company together with my colleague, David Ram. And that was the beginning and the start of TyroMotion and my personal start in the medtech business.
Great. Well, thank you, Alex. It really, I think that background resonates, I think, with a lot of people in that you started, in a university setting and prototyping and continuing to iterate. So I think it's a really, inspirational start. And I think will give hope to a lot of those starting out in this field for sure. So thank you, Alex.
I think I agree. I think it must have been a real challenge as well, especially to have that occur to somebody who's really, really close to you as well. So I'm hoping your dad have had a smooth recovery in the past. I think, he's had a lot of help from TyroMotion's products and development as well. So next, I probably want to ask Zen. I'm really interested to know, what was your biggest achievement to date?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't think I have a greatest achievement yet, but recent months, Fourier has achieved a new milestone. So we have successfully completed our D round and obtained financing from SoftBank. So for me, I think maybe Gary and Alex will agree, this is significant for our industry. Because previously, Gary has been in the industry for the longest time, of the three of us, Alex as well. We have not seen mainstream investors entering into the rehab tech or rehab robotics field. So for us, we think that this is an indication that we must be doing something right. And the industry is now set to grow further. So if I must say greatest achievement, then I think this recent development is something very encouraging for me, but I do believe this is not the end. This is the beginning. And I think we should consolidate the leaderships within the industry, work together through ISAC, through MotusAcademy, through ICOR, together, continue to push the industry forward, getting more major players, researchers, like-minded people to come into our rank to make this industry even more successful, so that we can deliver technologies that can actually make a difference to our patients' well-being and also to empower our clinicians with great tools. Yeah.
Thank you, Zen. Would Gary and Alex then also agree with Zen that this industry is so niche and it still needs a lot of development, and that it's so hard to get investors into this field as well?
Yeah, if I can start, I definitely agree with Zen. I mean, we came a long way, you could say, because the field is now hardly 25 years old, which is not nothing, but it's still a very young field. But in terms of growth and in terms of majority of the field, I agree with Zen. We're still kind of at the beginning. If you look at how big the players are, they're still rather medium enterprises at max. And if you also look at the technology, we just scratched the surface. There's still a lot possible. I mean, if we look at the exoskeleton development as an example, when we started, when we started in 1996, and it makes me feel very old when I say these numbers, right? But there was nothing at all, and we were able to bring the very first commercial exoskeleton to the market, the Locomat. But at the time, it was still very rudimentary. Today, I just read in an article from Bertalan Meshku, the medical futurist, that today there are, what are the numbers he said? Let me quickly check this. I was a little bit surprised. He said that there are 118 companies worldwide working on 172 different exoskeletons, which is, I think, great, because that means that the technology will move even faster forward, because if more players work on these technologies, there will be bigger improvements. But on the other side, if we really look whether there's already a big breakthrough with these exoskeletons, then I guess we all agree that have we achieved a lot? Yes, but is there still a major breakthrough to be done in example for free wearable exoskeletons that can be used in daily life? Then we're still not there. So yes, I absolutely agree that the potential is still big, and with these big investor firms supporting Fourier, and I congratulate you for that, I think we really get into hopefully a new era and even faster progress.
Yeah, also you also asked me, thanks for that. So I can also just confirm what San and Gary said. Financing, especially in industry, is always an issue. But not only financing, I see also a kind of inertia in the healthcare system. So it's really hard to push the payers for our technology, because at the end, somebody has to pay, and it's definitely not the patient. It must be somehow the healthcare system or insurance groups, whatever. So I think a real challenge also is to convince the payers for reimbursement in our field. So, and I think that all hinders us a little bit to move faster.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I agree. So there's been, obviously finances is a big challenge in this industry for sure. But Gary, would you say that that's been your biggest challenge in this industry, or has there been anything else that comes to mind that you would say has been a challenge with developing what you have to date?
I can tell you we went through a lot of challenges. Again, when we started and had the first prototype, the Locomat, and we showed it at the Rehab Care in 1999 in Düsseldorf. We showed it for the first time to public and to clinicians, to physical therapists. And at that fair, I would say 95% of the therapists and clinicians that came to our booth and saw the Locomat, they said, now they're crazy, the Swiss, they tried to replace the therapist by a machine. That's never going to work. And the same was when I presented my first poster on the Locomat in 1999, also in Toronto at the World Conference on Neuro Rehabilitation. The clinicians were not interested at all. They weren't looking at my poster. I was proud that Neville Hogan, he's, I would say, the only other pioneer in rehab robotics at the time, was stopping by and discussing my poster with me. But other than that, there weren't many people interested. And to really cross that barrier, to get the interest and the support from the clinicians to even just try the new robots, that was a huge challenge at the beginning. I mean, we are now in a completely different time where if you go to clinics, they know robots, they use different types, and the young generation is very open to new technology, trying everything from every app to every robot. But I think in the very beginning, that was the biggest challenge of all, to even get the acceptance and the clinicians to even start being interested in supporting us. I mean, we had one clinic in Germany where the head of research, and that was the first Locomat that we were selling outside of the rehab hospital in Bulgars here in Zurich. So he got the very first Locomat outside of Zurich, and then he had to hire his own therapists because the therapists of the clinic would not be willing to use this robot. And this just shows you how much we have changed in this field already. And that today, I agree very much with Alex that today get the payers on board is a big challenge. But we should not forget that we already have had to overcome a lot of hurdles. And yeah, that's the one that I just told you is one that comes to my mind first. But I think there were a lot of others. Regulatory, for example, would be another huge hurdle. If you allow me just a minute on that as well. When we started with rehabilitation robotics in the 90s, a regular robot was normally fenced off and you had to have 2 meters of distance to a robot. And then there was this group who said, we're now going to put a robot on a paralyzed patient. And I mean, the regulatory wasn't even there. There were no rules for that. I mean, and that's also, by the way, the main reason why we founded ISART was because the rehabilitation field had an interest to create regulatory rules that would even allow rehabilitation robotics. Because again, in the beginning, if you looked at a robot, collaborative robotics wasn't really there. That was still in the infancy as well. And an automotive robot had these very, very strict rules. So many hurdles had to be overcome to get where we are today.
Yeah, that's really interesting and a very, very good points there. I suppose I would agree that implementation science is a new thing. It's definitely coming into the field a lot more, and I think that speaks to the challenge that you are referred to, Gary. We do have one very pertinent question from the field, and actually one of the upcoming pacers of the MotusAcademy, Nicholas Flynn, here in Australia. So he's asked the panel that to enable implementation into the healthcare settings, do you envisage that there will be a reduction in the costs of rehabilitation robotics in the coming, let's say, decade? Who would like to take that one?
Yeah, I would say definitely. So costs are always a kind of question of quantity, and we are still in the situation that the number of devices that we are selling at the moment is not really high. So that means the higher the numbers will get, the lower the cost. So it's a little bit a chicken egg issue. So as long as you don't sell a lot of devices, the costs are high, but to sell more, you need to reduce the costs. So, and this is at least for us at the moment, a kind of challenge also to overcome this kind of hurdle to increase the numbers, that the costs are really going down. But we all know that the whole industry is growing. Gary explained a lot about the barriers that happened in the past. So this is not the case anymore. So I'm pretty sure that in the next couple of years, the costs will go down dramatically also for our kinds of robots.
If I may add something, I fully agree with Alex's comment. I would call it like this, that I believe the cost efficiency is getting better, because maybe the cost per patient for the healthcare system might stay more or less the same, because we have new inventions, new ideas. So there's always novelty which costs, but we can treat more patients. And each of the patient we can treat in a more effective way, so that we have a stronger effect with the same amount of costs.
Definitely.
I think that's I think that's a very important point from Zen. I mean, from Robert. In the end, we have to look at cost per outcome. And I think the cost per outcome has already dramatically improved. If you look at the Locomat, for example, the price of the Locomat has stayed very roughly more or less the same over the last 20 years. But if you look at what the Locomat can do, the quality, the augmented performance feedback that was added, and so on. So the cost per outcome, what you can provide to the patient, has already increased dramatically. But another thing, and I mean, in the end, it's the economy of scale that's going to be the most important point. And that brings me back to the number of exoskeletons. I mean, as long as we have hundreds exoskeleton providers, each selling, I don't know, 100, I don't know how much the biggest exo company is selling at the moment. then the cost will still be low because economy of scale cannot be reached. But if there's one company who would sell all the exos, and if we have a much better acceptance, then we will really get into economy of scale, because economy of scale normally starts if you are in the thousands, and that's when the price will really drop. And the question will be whether we reach that within the next 5 years or whether it's going to be another 20 years. This I don't know, but I guess it's going to be fast now. That's my hope. And with all these developments and also the funding that's now going into these players. And of course, not everybody will be a fan of too much consolidation, but I think consolidation will be an important step again, because 300 players, each one covering a very small niche, will never get into the economy of scale. That's why a consolidation of the players, which has started to happen a little bit, will be important if prices should go down. I mean, really down, not just 5%.
Definitely. I just want to add on to what Robert, Gary, and Alex just shared. Economic of scale definitely is the gist of it. I think at the initial phase of the industry, I think the leadership here did a lot of educating the market, creating a market when there's no market. As Gary mentioned, we reached another phase that we had to overcome new challenges, like what Alex mentioned, like reimbursement, the ROI, etc. So the consolidation of the market, we have seen some groups trying to do that. It's not really successful, but Fourier is also trying to do that as well. So over the past 2 or 3 years, we have successfully consolidated some smaller players in Asia. And now with our recent development, we're also looking at a possibility of partnering partners in North America and Europe, so that we can, like what Gary mentioned, be able to deliver more optimized solutions to actually prevent confusions in the market, because some of us have similar solutions and clinicians have to make tough decisions. And with the publications and all the documentations they have to go through before they can make decisions for implementation, that's actually creating work for them. And clinicians are already very busy. So the last thing they want is to go through tons of documentations and still not able to make decisions. Yeah, so totally agree with the leaderships. I think this is something that all of us trying to do. And we hope that in the near future, hopefully not another 20 years, we can see some meaningful consolidations that can actually create economy of scale. And then we can pass on the savings, to the patients and the clinicians. Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. I think it's really great to see how the landscape of the industry has changed from when you all started in the 90s, and then now has also developed into more economic of scale, being more cost effective, cost efficient, and also being able to use it more like as in a group therapy setting. Okay, so maybe a question for all of you as well. You guys have all been in this industry a long time. What would your advice and words of wisdom be for those who are trying to figure themselves out in the industry, who really new to the industry? And anybody want to start? Yeah, Zen?
We let Robert start first.
Sure, Robert. Words of advice for young engineers.
Yes. Also, I'm not from industry, but I, of course, collaborate a lot with industry. I think they should just never give up their visions. If they have dreams to do, if they have preferences and dreams, they should just follow it, not care too much about any kind of obstacles. Everything can change, and don't give up your braveness to try something.
Yeah, and if I may add from my side, what I think is very important, that number one, do not try to reinvent the wheel. That is one thing, because again, and I'm sorry if I always come with the same numbers, but I'm not sure whether there is 175th exoskeleton necessary. Maybe it's much more important to improve what is already there, to go out and find out what is already existing and then improve that. That is one thing that I find very, very important. I think we have too much of the same. And the other thing, and that's maybe related to it, is collaborate. I mean, we are working in one of the most interdisciplinary fields of the world, right? I mean, we are treating, robotic in itself already is interdisciplinary: electronics, mechatronics, mechanics, software, feedback systems, sensors, everything already from a technology aspect. And then we're bringing this technology into one of the most complex fields, which is the healthcare industry, where you have patients as your users, therapists as the people operating the systems, and a very complex buying center. And on top of that, a very complex regulatory environment. We have to get the payers involved. And I think that still many players are not working in an interdisciplinary environment. So my advice is look out for great partners, because in every field, the solutions are already existing. And if you combine those, then you can be successful quite fast. But don't try to solve rehabilitation robotic problems on your own. And I agree with Robert, stick to your dreams, but alone you will never be able to successfully achieve something in this field. And I think all the people here in this context have done that successfully. I mean, we heard from Alex already, right? He started out of an idea from a clinician, so he really had the clinical need already. And the same is true for myself at Balgrist, where I was treating patients manually, right? I was still sitting at the treadmill and doing manual treadmill training. That's why I knew what was needed, and that's why I invented the Locomat, and not just out of a crazy idea. And I think that's, to me, the most important advice. Collaborate, be aware that this is interdisciplinary, and find the best. I mean, there's so many great partners in all of those fields. And if you bring those partners together, then you can achieve a lot in this still young field.
Very, very true. Please, Sam, go ahead.
So I just want to add on to what Gary and Robert mentioned. I think Gary mentioned one keyword: collaborate. And that's important, because the last thing we want is to waste limited resources to reinvent the wheels. I think Alex, Robert, Gary also brought up a very important point that I think 3 years ago, I was having this chat with Gary. We were just saying that there was 165 exo companies out there, but now there's even more than that. The numbers keep growing. I think researchers want to build something, but maybe it's not really helping the industry when we are doing something so similar. So I think to collaborate, one thing is very important, is about the knowledge sharing. So I think MotusAcademy definitely, together with ISAT and the rest of the society, can do that by letting people out there, young engineers, people who are aspired to contribute to this industry, to have the opportunity to be educated, to know that, oh, what are the companies out there, what are the technologies out there, so that they can do what Gary mentioned, they can look at the current solutions and then try to improve on the solutions. Or maybe even they can join companies like out there, that they are interested to partner with to grow their dreams. So I think that will be meaningful in the sense that time and efforts will not be wasted. Because I personally have witnessed many young aspiring engineers starting companies, and then 3 years later they found out that, oh, someone is doing actually in something similar in the market. And then they eventually run out of financing, and then they had to fold. It's very unfortunate, because they had spent time and efforts, and they're very talented. So I will also encourage young engineers to reach out, to learn from industry leaders, to participate in such platforms, to get to know some of the companies and technologies out there. Yeah, and I think this is one of the main purpose and objectives that we have, MotusAcademy and ISAT. Yeah, Alex. Yeah.
Just a few sentences from my side. At the beginning, I guess it's always important to ask yourself, and that's what I totally agree what Gary just said before, and also you said. Ask yourself, which problem do you really solve with your idea? What is your USP? So honestly, it doesn't make sense. And I haven't read this article, but that's also my experience, that there are hundreds, more or less similar exoskeletons out there. Almost every technical university in the world is developing exoskeletons. It's cool stuff, no doubt. Yeah, but it's more or less 100 times the same of of the same. And so ask yourself, what is really your USP in the field? And finally, and I think this is the question that I ask myself at any time and always, why do you really want to do this? Why do you want to do this personally? Because it's tough, it's hard work. And I remember the times when I had a chat with Dr. Hesse, who passed away years ago, also one of the pioneers in our field. He asked me this question, Alex, why do you want to work in this business? If you want to become rich, don't do it. Go in another field of the industry, but don't work in that industry. And I think that's still true. It's still hard work, really hard work. And you need to be really a tough guy to stay in this business for a long time. So that's not that easy. I would not say don't do it, but ask really yourself, why do you want to do this in this field?
Yeah, very good point, Alex. And I think the point about being rich, of course, there's two ways of being rich, right? I mean, if it's about money, then I agree that's maybe not the field to be in. But I would still never change the way my career, because I think I got very rich in many other things. And you know, it's very rewarding when you walk to a clinic and some patients come to you and thank you that they think they can only walk because I invented the Locomat. And so I think it's very rewarding, and you can get rich in another sense. I agree, for fast money, it's the wrong market. At least now, this might change, who knows? But I would still not discourage the people, because it can be very rewarding. But I agree with Alex, it's a tough field because it's very interdisciplinary and still rather niche.
Yeah, I totally agree with Gary. I still remember my aspiration was actually to be a professor. So Gary knows that, right? I was trying to stay in university, do my research, and during my time writing papers, then somehow I got into the rehab field. And when I decided to enter into the rehab tech and assistive tech field, my professor said that it's career suicide. But back then, you know, like in the 90s, nobody really knows what we are doing. But I saw how our patients use our first prototypes, and that really got me very excited and very passionate about it. So then I started companies, and then also spent 10 years with Gary with Okoma. And then now we started Fourier, trying a different way to introduce technologies, you know, to build a different kind of platforms. We are seeing, like what Gary mentioned, people using our technologies and the smile on their face. Yeah. So definitely, you know, that kind of reward is a different kind of satisfaction, I would say. Yeah. But hopefully, you know, just to add on, I'm also hoping that young people will realize that the industry is growing. The numbers are showing that. A lot of research papers, markets analysis is showing, right, Gary, that our industry is growing. People are accepting the technology thanks to the good work that you guys are doing, you know, from educating the market, creating a market. When there's no market, the market is realizing that they need technologies. It's just what kind of technologies they need. So we are now able to attract young people with passion and aspiring engineers to join us. So we're hoping that more will do so. And I think as they do so, and as we start to move towards a consolidation of the markets between companies and groups, we'll be able to offer really like I would say rewarding careers for young engineers and clinicians to work with us, to support us, maybe even lead us to make this industry even more meaningful. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think all really good points. And we did have a comment made from Helen Hobbs, and welcome, Helen. Thank you for joining. And she mentioned, you know, I think maybe in response to Alex's point about, you know, what is the point of your invention? It's that really any technology, whether it be robotics, whether it be virtual reality, it really needs to make a difference to the patient's functional outcomes. And I think that's something that, you know, working collaboratively in a multidisciplinary team, maybe that's, you know, key, or maybe it's more forefront. But when you're working, you know, solo as an engineer in a lab, maybe it's not as clear. And these great ideas may seem, you know, really inspirational, but when we actually transfer them to real world scenarios, they may not work. So I think that's a really good point from Helen, that, we really need to think about how is this technology going to impact the patients in their translation to real life. So I think it's a great point. And maybe on a related note, I'm really interested to hear from each of you talking about, this young aspiring next generation is who do you feel is the next rising star in this field, whether it be an individual that you may know working, in a lab somewhere, or whether it's, the next piece of technology, the next startup, or whether it's a company. I'd love to hear from the panel about who would be your number one pick as the next rising star. So maybe I'll go with Alex first, because you're the CTO. So you might have a good idea of the next technology in the field.
And Gary and Zen is like,
So maybe two fields. I think technical wise, also in addition what Gary said, it's the guy who develops the electrical trouser. So the dream of everybody is to put an exoskeleton on and to move around in your daily life. We all know that we are miles away from that dream, but whoever is able to develop this, let's say, electrical trouser that you just put on, this will be the technical hero in the next years. But I also want to bring in another field, and it's not only the technicians and the industry who develops this great technology, it's also the user. So I think the users, they are playing a really important role, and we are completely depending on innovative users. And I see a parallel to other industry. It's not, it's the doctor who did the first heart transplantation, and maybe not the guy who developed this technology. So, and I see this as the next step in our field. We do need more innovative users. And I also know Helen Hobbs quite well. So maybe she is one of those. She's willing to use our devices. She's willing to try technology. And this is really, really important in our field, not only thinking on the technology and on the engineers, but also on the clinicians and the therapists who are using our devices in great ways, because finally they do the therapy with the patients, and the patients achieve some goals. And this is, I think, even more important these days than developing new technology. It's better to think about how to use this technology, which is already existing. So these are my real heroes at the moment.
Great answer.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And Gary and Zen, would you like to add on towards that?
Yeah, from my side, well, first of all, it's already an honor for me to be in this round here with some of the old stars, right, that you collected. And I do not see at the moment a one-person rising star. And I think this maybe also has to do with the field being very complex, as I already said. I mean, you need great players on the research side. You need great players on the clinician side. You need engineers, great engineers. And the breakthrough will happen with the combination, right? I mean, we talked a lot about exoskeletons, but the best exoskeleton in the future used for rehab might be added with feedback, with neurostimulation. I mean, that's the big story right now, right, from Lausanne, where you add a spinal cord stimulation with the exoskeleton. I mean, the field is getting more and more complex, and that means more and more players. I think it was much easier to become a star in the past when it was a pioneering field, right? Because everybody knows Neville Hogan, I guess, who works in this field, because he was just the first to do, or one of the first, but let's say the first really successful with an upper extremity exoskeleton. And I was maybe lucky to be the one with inventing the locomat, being the first lower extremity commercial exoskeleton, right? But today it's much harder to become a real star and shine out. It's still possible, but you need completely different conditions. And I think that because it is so complex, the next star will be the guy who manages all those fields the best. So the guy or the company who is able to manage all these different fields, that will be the next breakthrough to the next level. And I think this is something that's not so easy to get a person who is able to have the overview over all these different fields and bring all these people together. And so, but I hope that there will be a few people doing that, because then we will reach the next level of the rehabilitation robotics development, is my opinion.
I think I definitely agree with Gary, Alex. The field is getting complex, multidisciplinary, and I will add on to what Gary mentioned. I think moving forward, it should be a group of people willing to collaborate, work as a team, to use their strength to actually positively change the industry, create technologies that can have positive, clinical outcome, really good functional recovery, to work with other researchers in the other field, like what Gary mentioned from Roseanne Cortine's team. Yeah, their research helped SCI patients to be able to walk again, and now they even need more rehab. So moving forward, how can we be commercially successful? Because let's not kid ourselves. We run a company, so we need to be able to pay salaries. We need to be able to invest in future research. So we have to be successful. So for that to be happening, we need to have a team of people who can, if I may say, sense the future trend, utilize the existing technology, and capitalizing on future technologies to create solutions for the future. There are a lot of new things out there. There are AIs, there are like the VR, there are, now Meta, right, etc. How do we use the right technologies to create solutions for the future and then still be commercially successful so that we can create jobs, move the industry forward? So I will add on to what Alex and Gary mentioned. I think the future star will be a team of people, maybe a company, a group of people coming together, utilizing their experience, their knowledge, to build a platform or maybe a consolidations of know-how to really bring the industry to the next level. So I think that will be something that I'm really looking forward to. Yeah.
Thank you so much all for your answers. I think we have a few questions from the audience. So I will start with one of the questions. So Alexander has asked, how do you consider new medical certification regulations, such as the MDR in Europe, and local registrations as hindrance and obstacles for new innovations? Does time to market become unrealistic? I believe maybe Gary, you have more experience into the regulations.
I mean, that's thank you very much for that very important question, because that's one of the things that should really bother us. It should really bother us. And it's also one of the things that should bring us back to really work strongly together. So first of all, what's the impact? I mean, with the medical device regulation here in Europe, the regulatory is really getting too restrictive. And it was because there were mainly one company in Europe triggered this whole development, right? And just because there are one or two companies or few companies that are even criminal, we should not punish the whole industry. And it's really problematic, because if you have too high regulatory, on one side, you will a lot of small companies will not even get into the market because they cannot afford to get over the hurdle of the whole regulatory. I mean, already now in Europe, there's not enough notified bodies to do all the work. So young companies might have a very hard job, which will hinder innovation. You could argue that's good for the existing companies because they will not have as much competition. But again, for innovation, it's bad. And it's also bad for the cost of the products because it will increase the cost of the product. And I don't think that it will improve the safety. And to get what I started is, I mean, that's why we should all stand together. And that's where I think ISART, for example, should play an important role. As I mentioned earlier, ISART was already founded because of the regulatory question. And it was a huge need at the time. At the moment, the regulatory group in ISART is almost not active anymore because we don't see a huge need. But I think what is happening with the whole MDR, I mean, it is really where the industry should stand together, especially in a field like rehabilitation robotics, where we are in a very delicate field, as I mentioned before, right? We are treating neurologically impaired patients with a robot. That's a very delicate field. And I think it's exactly those things where the industry should stand together on the market where the companies are competing. But in these fields, whether it's reimbursement, what Alexander mentioned before, or regulatory, that's where the industry can be strong if they stand together, but will not achieve anything if these 200 small and medium companies just compete. So, I mean, this is really an important point, and it's not going to be easy. I mean, the rehab robotics industry is too small an industry to change the whole European regulations, but at least we should do our part in changing this development in the right direction again.
If I may add on to what Gary mentioned, ISART had the regulatory group, and definitely I think it should step up to represent the industry more. So we also want to use this opportunity to invite like-minded people or people with expertise in this area to join us. Please drop us a line, contact us, and we want to invite you to participate in our activities at ISART. But I think moving forward, it's like what Gary mentioned. The regulations are there to protect the safety, the the patient's well-being. But I think it's a bit overkill. We are not making invasive products that are very dangerous. There are some companies that they are doing something strange, but like what Gary mentioned, we should not punish all for that. So I think educations and communications are key. Platform like this, maybe I may suggest, Sarah, in the future we should invite maybe experts in the regulatory field to actually have webinar, having discussions. When I first entered into the industry, I was informed, and I'm actually aware that for our industry to be successful, we cannot work alone. I'm an engineer, so engineers like to build stuff, but I cannot build stuff by myself. Like what Helen mentioned, right? We need to work with clinicians to build something that the clinicians want to use. So I think I always believe, and I had this conversation with Robert and Gary before, we need to involve multiple stakeholders. Definitely, we need to involve the policymakers, decision makers, right? Because they may not be the expert in our field, right? They are sitting in the government making decisions, but if they do not know what we're doing, they may make the wrong decision. They may make rules that just kill off the industry. That's not good for the patients, not good for our clinicians, not good for our industry. So we need to give them the opportunity to learn about what we're doing. And policymakers also include the hospital CEOs. And what Alex mentioned, if they do not know what we're doing, they will refuse to have budget to buy equipments, technologies that will really make a difference to the rehab field. Gary was mentioning that at the beginning, people say it's crazy. The Swiss try to replace the therapies with robotics, but if they know how much benefit, efficiency, productivity, and ROI they can bring forth for the hospital or the clinics, then they will consider the possibility of putting funds to purchase equipment. That will also help to bring the industry forward. So the policymakers meant the government and also the hospital CEOs. The second stakeholders I'm thinking about is, of course, very important, the end users and the caregivers, right? The end users meaning the patients. Some of the patients are chronic, so they are in a condition for a long time. And they actually are very aware of what are the technologies out there. Caregivers, sometimes they research so much, they become experts as well. These are the people that they should speak up through special interest group. Join us in making their voice heard because if technologies are being denied from them, they're the ones going to suffer because they're going to buy expensive devices. We talked about it earlier on, the economy of scale, right? So they should speak up with us. Yeah. And then the third group will be the clinicians. Clinicians meaning the doctor, neurosurgeons, the therapists, OT, PT, etc. They should all come together, work with us, so that we can work and develop meaningful technologies. And also they must make their voice heard to the regulatory bodies. Don't overkill. The industry will die if they overregulated what we're doing. And the industry, like us, like Gary, Alex, myself, people who are entrepreneurs, it's important that we also work together. We compete in a meaningful, healthy manner, but together moving the industry forward. I don't think we fear newcomers. We welcome newcomers because eventually, there's a chance to work together. So the industry leaders, we should also use the platforms to actually make our voice heard. Last but not least, I think the researchers like Robert, the engineers, the scientists should also make their voice heard through platforms like this, because the professors, the researchers, they have resources in terms of grants, students, and the opportunity to do very fundamental and applied research. And they should work with the industry, or else they were making like the 1,000 new exoskeletons. Well, they can actually use the limited grant to actually work with the industry to actually improve what we already have, like what Alex already developed, what Gary had developed, instead of making another look-alike local med, like some countries are doing, which is very strange. So I think that the 5 major groups, if I may just outline again, the policymakers, caregivers, end users, the clinicians, the industries, and also the researchers and scientists. These 5 groups, if we work together, I think we can, I hope, to inform the regulatory bodies that we are not so dangerous. and then, the industry can move forward in a more positive way. Yeah.
Thanks, Sanya. Some really good points there that you made. And I think when you're speaking about the clinicians and the scientists, a little bit on that note, as well as thinking about the mechanisms behind, the action of what makes the robots work. I think, working with that group will be really key to the developments that are made in the technology moving forward. Instead of, as you mentioned, Gary, reinventing the wheel, we want to understand what works in the existing systems and why and how, and then that will further inform our future developments. But we have a lot of questions, similar questions coming in from the audience now about wanting to know really like what's the next thing that is inspiring you? What's the next big thing that you're looking forward to incorporating into the existing technology that perhaps you have amongst your portfolios? So maybe I'll divert again to Alex as the tech again to start us off.
I think that's what we already discussed. There will not be a single next big thing. I think the question and what at least Motion is working on at the moment and also in the next couple of years is the integration of the existing technology in working or existing rehabilitation strategies in the clinic. I think this is even more important than developing new devices. As long as the devices that we have are not really integrated in the strategies that are already existing at the caregivers, it will be difficult. And I think there's a little bit a kind of mind change, at least ongoing here, that it's more important to integrate it in the existing, what I already said, in the existing clinical strategies. And maybe that brings me to the point that basically the devices that we developed, they are working the same all over the world. But still, I think now it's also worth to think about the differentiation between different countries and different healthcare systems. So up to now, we were trying to sell the same device everywhere. And we didn't care about the strategies and the healthcare system, which are already existing, like in the United States or in Europe or even in China, it's completely different. And I think it's worth to ask ourselves, how can we adapt the technology that we already have in a way that they fit better to the existing healthcare systems, because then it's also easier to get the reimbursement there. There are different existing reimbursement strategies already out there, and it's easier to change the device and the strategy to the healthcare systems, in my opinion, than the opposite way around. So it's not that easy to move and to push healthcare systems to change their mind. They will never pay for anything if they don't need to pay. And this is a really hard work. It's nothing that they do from their own, only if they are forced to do it. And this will take a very long time. So in my opinion, it's maybe the better way to think different, and so the opposite way around. How can we adapt the technology to existing options that we already have?
That's a great point. It actually was one of the kind of questions posed by an anonymous attendee. Was basically, do you feel as though making product design in the different regions would be a good way forward, for Asia, for the US, for Europe? So I think that's a really good point. But I'll let maybe Gary or Zen add on as well in terms of if there's anything else you'd like to add.
If I might go first, I completely agree with Alex. Unfortunately, the sexy time where you can just invent something and it's great because it's new is over. We now have to really do a great job in doing the next important steps. The whole question of indication, right? Because it's one thing to have a device, but it's another thing to find out where and when and how to optimally use that device. We have now hundreds of devices for lower extremity and hundreds of devices for upper extremity, and maybe still a few for the hand, right? The hand is maybe still quite unsolved problem. Of course, Alexander, with the Amadeo, you made a great device, but I think there's still a lot possible in the hand. But the big question is not to have more devices. I think the big question is to really optimize and know exactly which device to use where, right? What is it the patient in a certain status of rehabilitation, we call it the rehabilitation continuum, really needs, right? Because a completely plegic patient needs a completely different device than a patient who's already ambulatory and so on. And I think that's where, as Alex said, hard work is now needed to optimize the indication, to really figure out what's the sweet spot of each device, because all of the people here in the panel, if we would use a Locomat, we would not get better, right? It's so clear, right? But which of patient really does profit from a Locomat, to find that out and to do the studies, that's the hard work that Alexander mentioned, and I think that is very important. And if we think we just need to invent more stuff in this field, then we will not really get much further. But if we will do the groundwork, do the research, collaborate, as Alex said, with the clinicians, and then prove our hypothesis, I think that is what will create the big breakthrough. The only thing I would like to add, I mentioned it already before, but I also think that combination of different technologies still has a potential. Neurostimulation was mentioned quickly, and whether it's really deep brain or intraspinal stimulation, or whether it's just some, TDCS was hip or vagus nerve stimulation, or any other kind of nerve stimulation combined with the optimal feedback. So I think that's where maybe on a technology side, there's still a lot possible. Whether we can really invent something completely new, of course, as long as it's not invented, we will not know, right? I think there's also potential, but in my view, the biggest breakthrough will be in the combinations.
If I may add something, basically I agree with the things said by Gary and Alex. The inventional steps are rather marginal nowadays, in that field at least, or now a big field. But we can optimize things with new technology, especially digitalization and information technology, including machine learning, artificial intelligence, to improve the continuum of care, to better follow the steps, the effects of each individual patient, but group this information and make it beneficial to our treatment, to the development of novel technologies. And there's a lot to do still. I mean, we now start just at the beginning of information technology and digitalization, and I think in the hope that the pandemic did push now this a little bit further. And this can cause such a strong effect in making our technologies more effective, that this can be disruptive. And then we have maybe a bigger step as we can estimate now.
I think that's a very important point also from Robert. Sorry, Zen, if I just comment quickly. And I think the bad news but the big opportunities, again, if the industry would stand close together and collect data together, again, we would be much stronger. I mean, at the moment, and ISART tried to do this one. So far, we did not achieve the result. But I mean, here, the same applies as to many other questions. As long as there's many small players trying to get big data alone, how should that ever work, right? I mean, that's where, and I'm sorry if I don't want to promote ISART too much, but I think, again, collaborating in this field could make a lot of sense. And I agree with Robert that we have big potential now because we have artificial intelligence that could help us to analyze this data, and we have easy ways to bring this data together. And I think that should be really an important step that the industry should do together.
Yeah, I add on to this last point Gary and Robert mentioned. I think collaboration is important because small companies trying to get, data is important now because data gives us a lot of insights, and small companies trying to do that will be challenging. I want to promote ISART, and I think for clinicians, institutions, and researchers and companies should all come together instead of all of us trying to invent our own. I remember Hokoma trying to do the HokoNet, Fourier trying to do our Infinity Net, and everybody trying to do their own. I think it's costing up a lot of efforts and monies. So I think if we have we can come together, collaborate through an independent, neutral platform, and then we can all benefit as an industry. I just want to add on to a few things, right, about innovations, about some of the challenges that we're facing. And I feel that what Fourier is trying to do is that we realize, and I agree with Gary, that the time of invention has passed. So when we started Fourier Intelligence, we asked ourselves, do you want to invent the next big thing? Then we realized that, gosh, the next big thing was invented by Gary and by Robert and by Alex. So maybe we should do something more down to earth, something that's simpler, something that is more straightforward, something that the clinicians maybe find it easier to use. So instead of building like the fanciful, like stuff like the Ferrari and stuff, we think that maybe we just make a Toyota. So simple, 1 degree of freedom stuff people will use, and maybe make it a bit cheaper. Seems to work a little bit, but still, it's not big inventions. So we realized that research and innovations are important, but companies like us, even though we receive some fundings, still find it challenging to continuously invest in that. So we decided that we should have partners. We have 17 strategic, joint labs, even with the ETH, with University of Melbourne, with Sheran Ability Lab, with the Toronto universities. What do we do with that? Because we realize that their job or their main objectives are to do research. So they are paid to do research. So there are successful stories like, Robert's Armin's was commercially successfully through a tech transfer with Hokoma, and that's the Amil Power, still in existence and people still love it. So we thought, can we replicate that? So I'm quite happy to share that, a couple of months back with the University of Melbourne, we have a tech transfer that is the Motus email. So we were happy with this outcome, and we thought that we should continue to invest more, leveraging the labs like ETH, like Melbourne, like Sherian's, the Kite, etc., to actually invest more time to build on fundamental or even future applied research. And industry like us then have the opportunity to commercialize it. I think this is the thing that we do best, right? Then each of us can focus in the area that we are best in. So Fourier is trying to play the role, not as the investor, but more like trying to make it commercially successful as a bridge to bring some of the good ideas to the market. So this is something that we are trying to do. And the next thing that we're trying to do is that we realize that we talked about this early on, the economy of scale. We realize that it's so difficult to innovate now because there's so many inventions out there. So we thought maybe we go back to the fundamentals. Can we build the building blocks for the devices, the technology. So we went back to the fundamentals. We look at the actuator, the motor, and we realized that, okay, there are some really good companies out there, but they're not building something exactly for us, customized. So we decided to build a platform. We call it XOS, the open platform system, a bit like the IEEE AROST, right? We try to encourage more people to use this kind of open platform system to develop applications, to promote creative applications of technologies. So our motors, our robotic arms, robotic legs, we allow them to actually access to our SDK to build new applications. And then we will support them. And then hopefully, if something interesting are being developed, maybe companies like us have the chance to commercialize it. So we want to be the facilitators of innovations, to encourage more young people and even new companies, young companies, to create opportunities and technologies for the future. So we do not want to be the one to make everything. So I think this is what Fury is doing with the XOps, with the joint labs. Yeah. So yeah, this is something that I think is very aligned with what Alex, and Gary, and what Robert mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Lots of work to be done, I think. And I think maybe the one key takeaway, there's lots of takeaways from today's session, but I think collaborate is a key word that I think resonates with me very strongly. And I think we feel so lucky to have these three great leaders in the field in the same space, albeit a very virtual one. We pretended with the backgrounds, but thank you to each of you for your time and your very, very valuable insights. And I also, of course, want to thank our audience for joining MotusAcademy's inaugural event and for taking a gamble with today's event being the first one. So we thank you for joining.
Do we want to get our president to say a closing?
Sure.
Yes, also from my side, as a function of president, I want to thank the three speakers. I saw very, very positive feedback from the audience already to our first webinar. We will go on and we will increase our reputation in terms of quantity, and quality is already good, and look forward to the next events. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, as well. Thank you so much, leaders and audiences. Sorry, Zen, did you want to say something?
If I may add, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think we should continue this in Rotterdam.
Okay, that's good.
Super. Me too.
So I think this is a short promotion for Rehab Week in Rotterdam this year in 2022. So we hope to see you guys in July. But also, I would also like to remind the audience that next week we'll also have another exciting webinar. So for the next kind of 4 weeks, we'll have it every Thursday. So next week we'll have upper limb robotics, a clinician's perspective. So joining our panel will be Amy Dennis-Jones from Hobbs UK, Jose Lopez from the European Neuroscience Centre, and also Nick Flynn, who's in the audience today. Thank you, Nick. Australian Catholic University, from Australian Catholic University. So really excited to hear their opinions on upper limb robotics. So please register your attendance online. For now, goodbye. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll really look forward to seeing you online next week and our future webinars.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
It was a pleasure. Hope to see many of you in Rotterdam. Bye-bye, guys. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.